I want to just share some broad brushstrokes now of what's happened on the planet just since this book came out in January a year ago. I gathered together some information for the epilogue that I wrote for when this book is released in paperback in a few months from now. And this is far from a definitive or far from a fully inclusive list of major events or scientific studies that have come out just in the last year, but this will give you an idea of how quickly things are progressing on the climate front. Just 1 week after my book was published, a team of glaciologists from UC Irvine in California and Utrecht University showed that over the course of 4 decades, the total mass loss of ice from Antarctica had accelerated at a pace 6 times faster than it had during just the 1980s. By July of 2019, scientists were trying to determine if glacial melting there would become irreversible. Think about that. Irreversible melting in Antarctica. They're questioning if that's already a possibility, if it's already in motion. Later in 2019, researchers in Greenland told the BBC they were, quote, astounded by the rate of acceleration in the melting and expressed fear for coastal cities in the future. One of the scientists said, quote, so we're losing Greenland. It's really a question of how fast. And said Greenland is already facing a melting, quote, death sentence. The loss of the Greenland ice sheet alone will raise global sea levels 20 feet. Another study warned that if current warming trends continue, and there is no reason to think that they will do anything other than continue to accelerate, the mighty Himalayas could lose most of their glaciers by 2100 as they warm up by 8 degrees Fahrenheit. This will bring radical disruptions of food and water supplies for upwards of 1.5 billion people, in addition to a refugee crisis of staggering proportions. As winter gave way to spring across the northern hemisphere, it emerged that 2018 was the 4th warmest year ever recorded, with the only warmer years being 2015, 2016, and 2017. This year is on track. Granted, I wrote this in December, as in 1 month ago. 2019 is on track to become the next 4th warmest year on record. That is another way of saying that the last 5 years are the hottest 5 years since record keeping began. So it didn't tie for the 4th warmest year on record. It became the 2nd warmest year on record. And that means the last 6 years are the 6 hottest years ever recorded. At the same time, the UK's Met Office announced that we are living in what will likely become the warmest decade ever recorded. And then since I wrote that a month ago, the 2010 decade was absolutely the warmest decade ever recorded. The global food supply is already under severe threat from an ongoing and catastrophic loss of biodiversity, just as Lovejoy was warning. Around the world, the library of life that has evolved over billions of years, our biodiversity, is being destroyed, poisoned, polluted, invaded, fragmented, plundered, drained, and burned at a rate not seen in human history. Ireland's president, Michael Higgins, said at a biodiversity conference in Dublin, quote, if we were coal miners, we'd be up to our waists in dead canaries, end quote. Climate disruption-fueled extreme weather patterns are also adding to the risk of a global food crisis, as research revealed how multiple bread baskets could fail at the same time. An analysis published in the scientific journal Biological Conservation reports that plummeting insect numbers globally could lead to the collapse of nature, quite literally. Quote, our work reveals dramatic rates of decline that may lead to the extinction of 40% of the world's insect species over the next few decades, end quote, reads the abstract of the study. It warns that insects could vanish within a century, and the researchers remind us that insects are, quote, essential for the proper functioning of all ecosystems and that the current trends are disrupting to varying degree the invaluable pollination, natural pest control, food resources, nutrient recycling, and decomposition services that many insects provide. To put it simply, when the insects are gone, so will be humans. And right now we are on a trajectory to lose most of the insects on Earth within 100 years. The Amazon rainforest, as I mentioned, burned last summer at a record pace, seeing an 80% increase in wildfires compared to the same period the previous year. Smoke from the burning forest darkened the sky over Sao Paulo, more than 1,700 miles from the fires, which were so large their smoke also covered parts of Bolivia, Peru, and Paraguay. Dr. Lovejoy, whom I mentioned, warned in an editorial in the journal Science Advances while the fires were burning, quote, "We believe that negative synergies between deforestation, climate change, and widespread use of fire indicate a tipping point for the Amazon system to flip to non-forest ecosystems in eastern, southern, and central Amazonia at 20 to 25% deforestation," end quote. The World Wildlife Fund, which Lovejoy used to head, estimates that 17% of the Amazon has been lost in the last 5 decades. And that statistic came before last summer's fires. The fires of last summer have brought us that much closer to the tipping point he warned us of. In fact, we could have already passed it last summer. Meanwhile, things went from bad to worse for the Great Barrier Reef. Not only is the reef subjected to ongoing bleaching events happening at a pace far beyond the natural rate at which they occur, but climate crisis-fueled rain events caused the reef to experience smothering of its coral when floodwaters drained onto it, bringing soil runoff with them. Some of the scientists referred to this as the nail in the coffin for the existence of the largest coral reef on the planet, which then received another nail from the Australian government shortly after that, when it decided to give the green light to dumping 1 million tons of sludge across the reef. Less than 6 weeks after that, a study was published showing that the reef had suffered an 89% collapse in new coral after its bleaching events of 2016 and 17. This means that as the reef dies, it is unable to come back to life as the waters in which it lives continues to warm, sediment-filled rainfall runoff covers it, and assaults from the Australian government continue. Meanwhile, in December, a study showing how the planet's oceans are rapidly deoxygenating, with some areas in the tropics having already lost 40 to 50% of their oxygen. To make matters worse, a landmark report showed that no matter how much emissions are cut, extreme sea level events that used to occur once per century will happen every single year by 2050. A previous study had already warned that unless dramatic emission cuts were made and coastal defenses against sea level rise dramatically strengthened, coastal lands that currently house 300 million people will flood at least once every year by 2050. An Oxfam report published last month showed that already 1 person every 2 seconds is being forced from their homes due to the climate crisis.